Okay, can you hear me? Give me a kick. Kick. All right. Well, at least we got one. Kick. Steve. All right. So it looks like it's just us three. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions that people sent in. And then it can go up later. I know the guy that sent the first question in, he's already told me he wouldn't be here anyway. But that's not going to stop us. How's the sound? Loud and clear? Too loud, too soft? Sounds good. All right. Can you guys see the Word document that's up there now with all the questions? Sounds good. Yep, all good. All right, I think we got it. Yeah, can see the doc. Okay, so that's all the questions there. And we're going to go through them one by one. If there's any more questions at the end, we can do that. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully this will be useful. We'll just dive straight in. I'm going to try and keep, it's too blurry to read, huh? Let me see if I can do something about that. I'm going to read, they're just the questions anyway, so I'm going to read them out. Let's see if that works. It's a little bigger. Change settings to HD. Yeah, you can change the resolution on your own YouTube window. Yeah, that's good. Anyway, let's get stuck into these questions. This was Carlton Williams. He told me he wouldn't be here for this, but how do you engage with friends and family that have brought into left PC views to see the other side of the argument? Do you reference think tanks, independent research organization? If so, what ones do you use? Well, I think I'm probably in the fortunate position that I don't have those types of people in my immediate circle of friends and family. So, as you know, I came back to Australia after being overseas for about 14 to 15 years last year, and was with my parents for a year at that time, moved out this year, and they have quite similar views to me. So there's no problem there. I've got a brother who's probably more center of the road than me, but he's, not so different. And then I don't know about you guys, but when I go to sort of family events, people don't tend to talk about that kind of stuff. They talk about their kids in school. They talk about, their jobs, just what's going on with their lives, that, what their footy team's doing, just sort of run-of-the-mill stuff, and never gets that heavy, at least the people I see in my family. And admittedly, I don't see a lot of my family. It's just the people who live close by, which is not many. And so I don't have any direct experience with that. But maybe what I would say is what people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins have said, which is about converting people to religion. They get letters all the time, converting people out of their religion, is that they get letters all the time from people that said, I've read your book and you changed my mind. But the thing is, you're not going to change anyone's mind in half an hour or an hour's conversation. That's, it's impossible, and it's an unrealistic expectation. It'll take a long time to convince someone out of views, especially people who don't want to be convinced out of those views. They think they know the truth. So I'd be very, you have to weigh up whether it's even worth it to ruin that relationship or not. How important is it to you? But if you're going to do it, I think, you send people YouTube clips or articles, and I wouldn't, don't inundate them. Just pepper them every now and then. Here's something. Hey, here's something that might challenge your view on this. Have a look at this. So I think that's the way to do it. But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I think that if you're going to give them examples, they've got to be relevant examples to their life. That something that it's tangible for them, not some esoteric. It's great to say, hey, you should read On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, or this von Mises economic theory. But I think you need to make examples local, if that makes sense. Yeah, Thomas Sowell's good. He is good. But again, just throwing a Thomas Sowell book at someone is probably not going to help. I would say, and you can find plenty of these online, send someone a 5-minute clip of Thomas Sowell demolishing, black victimhood or whatever the issue is, or, the wage gap. Ample stuff online with Thomas Sowell debunking all kinds of crap. So maybe, and just to finish off, I guess, do you reference think tanks, independent? Just good research that's good, research that's backed by evidence. Don't go to imright.com and get the first thing you find because it supports your view. Make sure it's well documented. We'll go on the second one. What are some good Australian libertarian or right-leaning groups, institutions to be involved in? Being young and a student, it's difficult to find like-minded people who have discussions with. I live in Western Victoria, and I've been a part of the IPA for the past year and enjoyed their conferences and meetings. I'm also a member of the Lib Dems. All right, so if you're a member of the Lib Dems, then you should know that the Liberal Democrats hold meetings in Victoria every month, and they move it around a bit. So if you go to the Liberal Democrats website, they have a calendar of meetings, and they had one in Ballarat recently, and they also had one somewhere in the Mornington Peninsula. So you can go along to those. Now, other libertarian right-leaning websites in Australia. So the Centre for Independent Studies, you already have the IPA. Then you have, there's a website called Liberty Works. You want to check that out, and I'll put all these links in the live stream. Liberty Works is a relatively new website. It's pretty good. There's the Australian Libertarian Society Facebook group, and they're the guys that organized the Friedman Liberty Conference that I went to last month. And there's also the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, and they have a website, and they also have a YouTube channel. So there's quite a few there. As I said, I'll put those in the description or in the comments of this stream, so you can have a look at those. But there's plenty of stuff out there, and if anyone else has anything to contribute, I only found out about Liberty Works and the Australian Taxpayers Alliance at the Friedman Conference. That's another thing I'd encourage you to go to if you can make it next year. I assume it'll be in Sydney again. But anyone, even if you're not an Australian and you've got libertarian material, websites that people can go to and check out, or YouTube channels, just throw them in the comments. Next question. What made you leave Japan, and did you see any SJW trends emerging while you were there? Not really. Well, why did I leave Japan? I was bored. Bored with the job, bored with the country. Now, to be honest, I was not one of these what you call Japanophiles. I wasn't in love with Japan and the culture and the I went there for work initially, because at the time, this is back in 2003, they were offering 2003, maybe 2004. I can't remember. 2003. They were offering these 3-4 month gigs where they'd fly you into Japan, put you in an apartment, and you get to teach at a university for 3-4 months, just a semester, and then they fly you back home again. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good, because during the holidays, the time off, I went back to Thailand and went into monasteries and did meditation practice, because that was my thing. So I didn't go to Japan as someone who was enamored with Japanese culture or anything. And quite frankly, I never did become enamored with Japanese culture. But I was bored shitless at my job. And many people would say, wow, because I had tenure at university, so it was reasonable pay. And when you're a single guy in Japan, things are pretty cheap. You get plenty of money. And I had 3 to 4 months off a year, paid vacation, maybe 3.5 months a year. And that's a pretty good deal. And it was kind of what I'd been working towards, because I worked my ass off in finance. Then I went the complete other way and worked, meditated in monasteries and things. So then I sort of swung back to the middle, did a master's degree, got a master's degree in linguistics, got a university job, and now I had this job where I didn't work that hard and I had a lot of time off and I had okay pay. So I kind of found this, or what I thought was a sweet spot. But the problem was that the work I was doing bored the shit out of me. I didn't like it after a while. There were some aspects that were okay, but I just wasn't into it. So it's a kind of a tale of be careful what you wish for, because you might actually get it. So as far as SJW trends, so for example, there's no strongly left-leaning bleating about, well, we need to take in more refugees. They don't give a shit about that. There's Muslims in Japan, there's mosques in Japan, but very few. Japan is, as a lot of people have said, a lot of historians, is kind of a land of contradictions, because on the surface, Japanese culture is very conservative, but then there are all kinds of weird sexual proclivities that are totally acceptable, like grown men reading hentai, which is anime porn, basically. You'll see them reading it on the train in the morning, just in front of people. Everyone can see what you're reading. And that seems to be perfectly acceptable. And so there's contradictions like that. Social change is really slow in Japan. It's been really is an old boys club for a long time. So there's kind of a push for more women, but not on an affirmative action kind of basis, just a recognition that, hey, women can do stuff too. So they're not pushing quotas that I know of, but I could be wrong. It's been a while. Is Japan very nationalist? There's well, if you know the history of Japan, it was extremely nationalist, and part of the post-Second World War change was that they did away with that because it was kind of a, shameful idea. But you still have these lunatics that drive around in buses with loudspeakers blaring with these black flags, and they're completely nationalist. They want to get all foreigners out of the country, but they just basically ignored. They are considered fringe lunatics. But I think what you did see more recently with sort of China getting, encroaching on the Japan Sea and other areas, some of the islands there that are in dispute, China reasserting its power, that you can see that nationalism could easily ferment in Japan if there was a real threat from China. I don't think it'd be tough to get a nationalistic sentiment in Japan. It has leaned in the 13 odd years I was there. You saw that change, because when I got there, it was Koizumi was prime minister, and you didn't have a sense of much of that nationalism. But now the Abe speaks. There's a bit more of that in what he says, but I think that's more a reflection not of Japanese people, but just of the times that China has, grown in power and extending their tentacles out everywhere. So, yeah, the other thing I'd say about Japan is that if you pay any attention to the mainstream MGTOW movement, which you shouldn't, because unfortunately this mainstream MGTOW movement has sort of been overtaken by the mirror image of feminism, I think, it's all women's fault, which is unfortunate. But they always use Japan as an example of what happens when men go their own way. Now, there is this phenomenon of what they call herbivore men in Japan, men that have thrown off, and this is more of a, it's not a rejection of feminism or women more than it is of the old way of doing things in Japan, which was, you go to university, then you go into a company and you have a job for life. And this is what's called the salary man. And that's changing. So a lot of young men have decided that that's not for me. I'm just going to work part-time in some job, and all I need is financial security to take care of myself and play my computer games, and that's it. And this is the herbivore man, not interested in starting families, because you got to remember Japan was extremely prosperous right up through to the end of the 80s. Then the bubble burst, and they've really we're coming up towards 3 decades of sort of non-existent growth. The stock market is about 40% of where it was in 1990. Almost 30 years ago, the stock market was much, much higher. Economic growth, they've just been in and out, in and out, in and out of recessions. It's been one long great, never got as bad as the Great Depression did, but it's been one long economic stagnation. And so a lot of that idea that you would get into a company and you would go up the ranks and you would become more prosperous, that is no longer appealing to people, because the opportunities that were there 25 years ago are not there now. And so there's that aspect to it, I think. But to get back to the point of MGTOW, is that although you see these guys pulling back, the exact same phenomenon can be seen by the women. So you'll always see the MGTOW cite these statistics about how 30% or 40% of young men between the ages of 18 and 25 say that they want nothing to do with women and they don't want to date. But then when you look at the opposite of that, which is the women in those surveys, even a greater percentage of women say the same thing, or at least the same and more. So as you know, like Japan's population is shrinking. Their birth rate is the lowest in the developed world. I think South Korea maybe just overtook them. I'm not sure. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a land of contradictions, but not much SJW stuff. I mean, think about cultural appropriation. Now, Japan is a country of cultural appropriation. If you go into a supermarket in Japan in November, it'll be indistinguishable from a supermarket or a department store in the States or Australia. You'll walk in, they've got the Christmas music playing. There'll be Christmas trees and tinsel everywhere, and there'll be pictures of Santa. They don't have actual Santa Clauses, but they love that shit. They appropriate it. What's another one? Halloween. The Japanese penchant for dressing up and what they call cosplay. They love that stuff. And so the idea of cultural appropriation to them is ridiculous. They don't see it in any way. I think there's a new movie out with Scarlett Johansson. Of course, there was a great big stink made about it because she was playing an Asian character. The Japanese don't give a shit. They love it when foreigners take an interest in their culture. So they reject all that kind of stuff as kind of stupid. Let's move on. What do we got? Chicken tenderloins. Probably a bit out of your field of expertise, but what is your stance on climate change? And if you acknowledge it as an issue, what sort of solutions or legislation would be in favour of? So, yeah, the reason I haven't talked about it is precisely because you're right. I don't think I'm up on it. Here's what I think. A little bit I know. I think global warming is real. I believe that man contributes to it. But what I don't believe is that we need to destroy our energy security to make what are, and I'm talking about Australia here specifically, to make almost negligible, well, they are negligible changes to the Earth's climate. So my understanding is that the four biggest polluters in the world are the United States, India, China, and Russia. And that the United States, because the United States is now basically has its own, has energy security, doesn't even need to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords because they'll come in under the requirements there anyway. And then you've got Russia, China, and India, which are exempt. That's my understanding. They're actually exempt from these that Paris Climate Accord because they're so-called developing countries. Then you've got someone like Australia who's decided to pursue renewable energy targets. And the numbers I've seen is that if Australia hits all these targets by 2050, we will reduce the Earth's temperature by something like 0.002 of a degree. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is drive people's energy bills up through the roof to do it, which sounds like just complete idiocy. Now, when it comes to energy, I'm an energy agnostic, whatever's cheapest. And I don't care if that's coal, preferably clean coal. But here's the thing. Australia has something like, I heard a number like 196 years worth of coal. We have enough coal to last us 196 years. We have something like 1/3 to 40% of the world's uranium, and yet we have not one nuclear reactor. I think that's just nuts. That's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, and as you said, Daniel, the left love climate change because it's like a religion to them. It really is. And this is the problem. I recognize that global warming is a thing. For example, yes, the Antarctic ice sheets are growing, but the Arctic is shrinking at a much faster rate than the Antarctic is growing. But here's the thing. All the predictions that have been made about climate change, to my knowledge, have vastly overestimated things. We here in Australia had an idiot running around by the name of Tim Flannery who was making all kinds of predictions about what would happen here in Australia. So by now, Australia's dams were supposed to be empty. In fact, they're 80% full. We were supposed to have all these weird and wonderful climate events that just haven't happened. We hear reports about the Great Barrier Reef as dying, but then, you know, the next day we get a report that says this is just natural coral bleaching, and then and those corals actually come back after a while. So, like I said, I'm not up to date with the science, but what I can say is, and maybe this is a hopeful thing, is that it has kind of fallen off the radar in political debate. And I know a lot of people on the left find this distressing, but I think there are more important things going on. I'm not sure that climate change is the most important thing. And I'm not convinced. I don't believe any of the predictions. And this comes back to something that I know pretty well, which is working in prediction markets, is that these guys are not estimating, for example, you know, insurance policies. They're not actuaries looking at lifespans, which, you know, fit neatly on normal distributions, on nice bell curves. These are amazingly complex systems. And look at all that shit. Amazingly complex systems. And I just don't trust the predictions. And the predictions have been consistently wrong. And always overestimating the problems. I mean, there was headlines this year that 2016 had been the hottest year on record. Now, the actual numbers were that it was the hottest year on record by 0.1 degree, which is in the margin of error. So that could be just error. But the way it's reported in the media, see, the left might be right about aspects of climate change, but they do themselves no favor by exaggerating it. Yeah, that's right, Daniel. I think you're right. The right seem, on the most part, to ignore it, and I don't think you can ignore it. Oh yeah, so legislation. Well, look, here's the thing. But this, we've kind of passed this by in Australia. If you're going to get the government interfering in climate change, well, the most obvious thing to do is have a carbon tax, because at least you create a market within which competing energy producers can compete. With a renewable energy target, all you say is, okay, we've got to hit 23% of the country's energy coming from renewables. Well, where's the incentive for the renewables to be competitive under that type of system? Because they just say, look, by this date we have to hit this target. It doesn't matter at what cost they produce the energy, does it? They're just going to say, well, we need that percentage of the energy, so we just, okay, that means we need to build X amount of wind farms or whatever it is. And there's no incentive for them to compete on cost. I mean, obviously they can't charge whatever they want, because no one would put up with that. But that's the problem. If you want to get the government involved, you create a carbon tax. At least you create a market. It's not a free market. It's not a fair market, but you create a market within which energy producers can compete. But we've been down that road here and we rejected it. So I don't know where you go with it. But I personally, here in Australia, I would completely abolish renewable energy targets, because I think they're ridiculous. They're like quotas. They're like gender quotas. They don't encourage productivity or efficiency at all. Let's move on. Andrew Carter. Yeah, so this is a really good question and a difficult one. I'm not sure I have an answer for this. What approach would you suggest for dismantling the established SJW culture in the Australian public service? So if you're listening to this and you're not an Australian, it doesn't matter, because I'm sure that your government is infected to some degree with the same kind of thing. We have, at the moment, in our public service, sweeping our public service, things like unconscious bias training, because apparently we're too stupid to be able to overcome our own bias and stop employing white men. I mean, this is just, again, this is just another diversity ideological attempt to shoehorn more women into positions of power, which is not good for anyone. So I would say this, though. I don't think you can look at that culture without recognizing where it comes from, and it has to be coming from the universities. So I think that's where you have to attack it. And I think I'm not hopeful in the short term. I think it's probably going to get worse because the universities have been pumping out these idiots for decades now that believe this nonsense like unconscious bias and, you know, internalized sexism and misogyny and all this kind of bullshit. But since taxpayers fund the universities, and we fund something like 55% or 53% of student fees, and I think what needs to be done, and I haven't done this analysis, I did see some in America, that the number of students going to university in the United States, for example, and I suspect here in Australia, has kind of grown in line with population, maybe a little bit higher, but the number of administrators being hired has doubled over the same period. I'm not sure what that period was, but maybe a couple of decades. So, and you know this, if you look at any university website, they have diversity officers and all kinds of officers just to pamper these snowflakes. And so I think the government should, you know, if it's government funded, I don't like government interference in anything, but government's funding these places and they should demand greater productivity, because you can do away with all these, you know, diversity officers. I think they're the biggest waste of space and money. I've said this before in a previous video. You could fire every single diversity officer in Australia, in any corporation, public or private, and save millions of dollars overnight, because they create nothing. They are non-contributing zeros. And so I think they should go in and have a look at these university administrations and say, look, you've got to get more efficient. You know, the percentage of money spent on students in proportion to administration has to go up, because after all, that's who it's there for. And I think one of the other problems is, and it's been identified by people like Jonathan Haidt, is that the faculty used to kind of run things, but the administration runs things now. And the faculty, two problems there is the faculty is not running it, but the faculty is also too scared to speak up because their jobs are on the line. And let's face it, academics are not the most brave people to stand up for things. So I think but then I guess the problem is now that you've got all these idiots in humanities faculties, you don't want to be giving them too much power. But I think there's too much power generally in the administration area. There's too many administration workers. Do away with all these unnecessary, you know, snowflake-inducing positions that cater to this SJW culture. And hopefully that flows through eventually. We get rid of all this bullshit, this cultural indoctrination, and get back to just basics, teaching the subjects and teaching subjects that get people jobs, and you do away with that. And then the only other thing I can think of is, in Australia at least, you need a new government and not one of the two major parties, because both major parties are on board with this crap. I mean, it's the Liberal right-wing government that has now introduced unconscious bias training into the public sector in certain ministries. So you need a whole different government. And although we have these growing small parties, we're a long way from that. But that's why I make videos like I made a few months back that people didn't like, where social justice is winning, because it is. Because you can say whatever you like on YouTube, that they get crushed and made fun of and ridiculed, but they're actually making changes out there, and that's the problem. Samson. I wonder if how many people? We got 5 people watching. Are you there, Samson? We've got Duke, we've got Daniel, we've got Stephen, and myself. So there's someone else there watching, but they're not speaking up. But anyway, Samson, what I would say is that I could go through thousands of documents and spend hours on what you've asked me, because there's so much to it. And I don't know how many other people in the chat are that interested. But I'll say this, and this is a boring response, but it is true, that you have to decide when you're investing. It matters how old you are and what your goals are. So if you're just out of university and you've got 40 years to invest, you have a different vesting profile than someone who's 55 with 10 years to go before retirement. And to give you a concrete example of that, if in year 2000 you were 55 years old and planning to retire in 2010, and you were wondering what kind of allocation you should put towards stocks, and you thought, well, I'm going to take a bit of risk here. The market looks good. It's up at all-time highs. Well, you actually lost money, because over the next 10 years, the stock market gave you negative returns. And that's why it's important to figure out where you are in your life. What is your investing time horizon? Have you got 10 years, 20, 40? What is it? I'm looking at your photo. You look, if that is you, that you look relatively young, maybe 30s, could be wrong, but you've got a decent time horizon. So it's less important when you start, but it still matters. So let's say it like this. If you started investing in 2000, so it's now 17 years later, you have an annual compound return of about 4% per annum in the stock market, which is about half of the historical return. And that's only because right now we're at the end of a cycle. And when this cycle goes down, at the next bear market, whatever that is, could be this year, could be next year, could be 2 or 3 years away. When that goes down, you'll be able to see that from the highs in 2000 through to 2018, 2019, the total return of the stock market would have been zero over an 18, 20-year period. And that's important. So it's important when you start investing. You don't want to invest at the top of the cycle. That said, and it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but that said, it's difficult to time the market. Now, you mentioned Hussman there, so I'm going to go up here. But this chart, we'll see how this comes up on the screen. I might have to reduce the size. Is that showing up? There it is. So this chart has this is basically the Buffett method. Now the Buffett method is market cap to GDP. Now Hussman does a little tweak with GDP because some of the profits of GDP come from overseas companies. So he does this thing called GVA. You can see it there, non-financial GVA. And it's an inverted line. So what you see there, the blue line is an inverted line. That's market cap to GVA. And you can see down there where the green arrow is that it says 0%. Now what that means is that the subsequent 10 to 12-year returns based on where this measure is today will be about zero. So if you invest today, start investing today, you can expect about a 0% return per annum for the next 10 to 12 years. And that's pretty shocking. And most people would laugh at that. And they did laugh at it in March of 2000. And that actually turned out to be worse because your return over the next 10 to 12 years was actually negative. So I'm trying to drive home the importance of when you start to invest. Let me just show you another chart. This is a scatter plot from Husband as well. And you can see that the red dot there, that's now. Now down here, here's your actual subsequent 12-year return. So right now it's predicting a return of, basically 1%. It's the second most overvalued point in history. Okay, in history, and this goes back 100 years. The most overvalued point is the dot-com bubble. That's the one just to the right of the red dot. That's where we are today. Now, there are all kinds of arguments about why today isn't as overvalued in the past, low interest rate environment, and low interest rates do have some correlation with stock market prices, but they don't explain this kind of huge overvaluation. So this is that market cap to GVA, but not inverted actually this time. And the number down here is 2. It goes from 0 to 2. So for example, you can see it bottomed out around 1982 at 0.45. So that means 0.45 of the historical average. So the average is just around here somewhere, in just over the 0.9 line. And this most overvalued point here is the dot-com bubble, where it was 2.25 times the historical average. So today you can see that it's already back to 2 times the historical average, and it's higher than it was in 2007, just before the financial crisis. So that's where we are today. Now he's done the work back to the Great Depression, and today's level is about equal with the Great Depression. So you got to think of it this way. Today's overvalued stock market is probably the second or third most overvalued in its entire history. And the correlations that hold, like the ones I showed you before, like this scatter plot here and this one here, these correlations are something on the order of 94%. So if you're going to bet that today is a good time to invest in stocks, then you are betting against a 94% probability that it's going to be pretty bad for the next 10 years. So just think about that. So what should you invest in? Well, again, that depends on your time horizon, depends on your, how much risk you want to take. I would say that if you've got a, a conventional portfolio, 60% stocks, 30% bonds, 10% cash, I'd say that's on the risky side, given the level of overvaluation in the market today. So I've got a lot of cash personally, and I'm in the process of initiating some short positions, but maybe I'll talk about that another time. I'd have a lot of cash on hand, but again, if you've got a 40-year time horizon, you've got a different consideration. It's less important. You've just got to be able to decide whether you can handle a 40 or 50% stock market decline and not panic. 40-year time horizon. If you have, go for it. Now, the other thing is, if you're not willing to put in the time and do your own research and pick your own stocks and do all that, and you don't have a real sort of passion for it or real interest in it, then I would just invest in index funds like Vanguard. Vanguard's the lowest cost, because the dirty little secret is all the active managers out there that charge you more fees, more than half of them do worse than the index. So why would you do anything else but the index? Now the index funds have got a little bit faddish recently because they've been doing so well. So they'll go through periods of underperforming and outperforming. But if you want to just forget about your money, stick it in an index fund and let the index do the work over time. And even if you do have, you should really know this, even if you do have the interest to make your own investments and pick your own stocks, you've still got to remember that you are competing against billion-dollar firms that have hundreds of people who are full-time looking at all this data every day, and it's very hard for you to beat them. But yeah, I could go on about that for years, but I won't. So I missed a question over here. Do you think the Lib Dems' popularity will begin to grow? I don't have a crystal ball. I hope so. I think Mark Latham can inject something into them and bring along a following, which is good. My only problem with the Lib Dems is their sort of fascination or the obsession with guns, because I just don't think that's a vote winner. I don't think it's a mainstream issue. I think they do have a point. I think regulation around guns in Australia is pretty ridiculous, but it's not something that you're going to convince the public on, I don't think. Yeah, that's right, Duke. The silver lining is that few managers consistently do much better than average. I think there was a recent, you can see different types of research on this, but something like 70% of active managers, that's people who are paid fees because they supposedly have specialist knowledge, do worse than the index average. So that's pretty appalling indictment on the active management industry. And it also, maybe it speaks more to the fact that it's just really, really hard. It's really, really hard because there's billions of dollars at work trying to, produce alpha, that extra little bit of return. Okay, Duke, this is your question. I love the way you use stats. I'm a statistician by trade. What programs do you use to collect, analyze your data? Do you have published works besides here? So if you're a statistician, then you know more about stats than me, I would say. I did some stats at uni. I worked in the financial industry, so most of the stats there were around discounted cash flow models, just sort of, no, you don't need, this is probably of interest, that you don't actually need to be a real good mathematician to work in the financial industry. That seems counterintuitive, but you don't have to be, because they don't use advanced statistics most of the time. They probably should, but they don't. Now, what programs do you, well, these days I just use Excel because it has everything I need. Before, I've used SPSS. I've used, there's a free program now called PSPP, which has a lot of the, I think if you're just doing basic stats, PSPP is probably fine. And it's free because SPSS is bloody expensive. I suppose if you work as a statistician, you get, you don't have to pay for it yourself, but it's expensive if you have to pay for it. Do you have published works? I've got one peer-reviewed published paper, but it's not deeply technical or statistical. So, I mean, there's some statistics. There's a statistical breakdown in there, but it's basic stuff. There's no factor analysis or ANOVAs or anything like that. I guess my statistical knowledge helps me to be able to read papers and understand what they mean when they talk about, is something statistically significant? What's the margin of error? What's the, is it 0.95, 0.99? What's, so I can read stuff and know whether they're bullshitting or not. I know what a regression analysis is. I know what a factor analysis is. So I have that knowledge, but I wouldn't call myself a statistician. You use R programming language. I don't even know what that is. but maybe you can send me a private message about that. Okay, so, oh yeah, that published paper, I've got a couple of other papers, but they're in university journals, and if you know anything about university journals, they're not peer-reviewed, so you can just write an essay basically and stick it in with a few references, and that's one of the problems with academia, because there's such a publish or perish mentality. There's very little checking of standards when it comes to university journals. That's in Japan, because that's where I was. So I think this is the last question, actually. The foods that immediately come to mind when I think of Australia are barbecue, shrimp. See, Richard, there's your first problem there. No one in Australia says shrimp. Prawns, they're barbecue prawns. Now, if you were old enough, and you look like you're old enough, Richard, to remember the Crocodile Dundee commercials on TV, he said shrimp because those commercials were advertised to Americans to get them to come to Australia. But no one says shrimp. Vegemite, absolutely. Foster's Lager. Well, see, the it is that, or the Australians like to say, is that Australians actually don't like Foster's. They drink other stuff, and we export that shit to you guys, and they love it in the UK. I don't know how big it is in the US, but they love it in the UK. That's the dirty little secret. But it isn't true that Australians don't drink Foster's. Some actually do. Some like it. It's still reasonably popular here, but I think, since I'm not a beer drinker anymore and been away from the country, I don't know what is the most popular beer here anymore. It used to be VB. If you were in Queensland, it would have been 4X, but I don't know what it is these days, because there's so many sort of, what do you call them, boutique beers now and shit. I used to like Crown Lager. I don't know if you get that one over there. Bloomin' Onion at the Tampa, Florida-based Outback Steakhouse. Well, let me let you in on a little secret. I didn't know what Bloomin' Onion was until I went to Outback Steakhouse in Japan. I'd never seen it before, so I didn't even know if that's really an Australian dish. I guess I could have looked that up, but I have no idea. If it is, first time I saw it was in Japan. What do you consider to be Australian cuisine? How does it vary coast to coast, north to south? Well, I don't know, because I've never been to the west coast of Australia, never been to Perth. I've never even been to South Australia. I would say that obviously there's different parts of the coast where you'll get different seafood. So there's different parts of the, like up not far from where I am is Moreton Bay, and you can get these Moreton Bay crabs and other seafood that's kind of famous. And then if you go down south in Victoria, you can get different types. You would have heard that people eat things like kangaroo and emu meat and crocodile meat. That's very rare. Well, someone Stephen in the comments says that kangaroo is becoming more popular, but I still don't think it's mainstream. People don't just go down to the supermarket and buy kangaroo once a week. It just doesn't happen. It's kind of a specialty. Yeah, he says things like chicken parmesan, spaghetti bowl. I think Australia's got a mix of other cultures' cuisines. I suppose one traditionally Australian thing would be damper, which was a bread that the what do you call them? Stockman. They used to make it. They used to cook it on like the campfire. When the campfire went out, they'd cook it on the coals. It's just bread, really, and it lasts for days. And so after a few days, it probably is about as hard as a rock. But you can still get damper in some restaurants. They'll make a kind of version of it. Now, as with for Aboriginal cuisine, well, of course, they they would eat kangaroos and things, but lots of fruits, berries, naturally growing stuff. And if they lived on the coast, lots of fish, shellfish. I think probably the most famous one of Aboriginals is witchetty grubs, which are horrible looking things. You can find them in the bark of trees, certain types of trees. Yeah, I think that's it. They still kill dugongs and eat them, which is a bit of a problem. But it's one of those things where no one's allowed to kill them and eat them except Indigenous people, because Indigenous people have traditionally killed them and eaten them. So there's that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, as a kid, and I'm pretty sure anyone that was a kid in the 80s was brought up on sort of working class meat and two veg, potatoes, sausages one night, steak the next night, maybe chicken the night after. You always had either potatoes and peas or potatoes and beans or potatoes and carrot and beans. Yeah. So look it up. I'm sure you can find plenty of stuff online, but that's about all. That's about all I got. So how far? That's an hour to get through all those questions. Don't know how interesting that has been. Hopefully, a lot of different types of questions, so hopefully you get something out of it. Now, I'm going to throw it open to the chat, see if anybody's got a question in there. Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? No. It says there's 6 people watching, of which one is probably me, so there's 5 of you in there. If you've got a question, speak up now or forever hold your peace. Not a question. Is not a question. If there's something that you asked in the chat and I didn't get to, then university ideologues, how do we stop them? Well, I think, I do what I do, which is try to get the word out. I think we have to be a bit better organized. I don't think that making YouTube videos is enough. I think we actually need our own version of activism. I think we need to expose the falseness of things like unconscious bias. You can rip that apart, that the science is terrible on that. It just needs to get out into the public debate. I mean, most people just don't hear about this stuff. It happens without their consent, just push through. But universities, it's really hard to change a university culture because once it becomes entrenched. But I think these people need to be named and shamed and discredited. That's what I think needs to happen. Like actual names of people and just not smearing. I mean, like getting the names of particular professors who push certain points of view and take their research apart and criticize it. And, have people like me and, Mark Latham's Outsiders talk about it. Put it out there, put it out to the public. That's the only way you're going to get it out. And as I said before, I think a lot of this ideological bullshit would go away if we strip back I don't know if you were here earlier, Duke, when I talked about stripping back the amount of administrators at university. To just look, faculty and students, and piss off all these diversity officers and all these unconscious bias training morons and the like that create nothing. They're just expenses, because at the end of the day, the taxpayer funds most of this shit. I think if I made a video yesterday about what was happening in up in Washington State, Olympia, Washington State, at Evergreen State University, and once people see the video footage of what's going on, this is a public. It's Evergreen State College, so it's publicly funded, I assume, and people need to get upset at this shit. And I think someone mentioned, I'm trying to think of who mentioned this, but we need people going into universities and filming lectures and filming what these people are up to on their camera phones and putting it up on the web and saying, look at this bullshit these people are teaching. It needs to be exposed. Would be good if you could do a vid on climate change. Yeah, I might get to that, but I think it's best not to talk about things that you're not fully versed on. I probably talk about too many things as it is. Yeah, there's no Australian version of a Milo or a Thomas Sowell. Yeah, we need some sort of flashy either. It's sad to say, but, a middle-aged guy like me, unfortunately, doesn't have that gravitas. It has to be, a gay person or a woman, an attractive woman, just like if you show up on YouTube and you're an attractive woman and you start just spouting conservative talking points, all of a sudden you got 100,000 subscribers. And that's the world we live in. Just have a look at Rebel Media. Look at the type of people they stick on there. You won't see my head on there. You'll see attractive women, because they know that gets the views. I'm sure there's somebody out there, because this culture of victimhood and overt sort of hatred of white people, anything white, it's going to produce more and more disillusioned people. Yeah, a hottie would be good. But you need someone, you can't just have a hottie, you've got to have someone of substance who knows the topics and knows what they're talking about. You think climate change is a wedge issue that risks dividing potential movement against SJWs? Yeah, I do too. Yeah, it's a difficult one, climate change, because I don't like the extreme right position, which is just, it's a non-issue, it doesn't exist, it's all bullshit. I don't buy that. And I don't buy the left alarmist view that it's just, it's the end of the world and Florida will be underwater in 10 years' time. I think Hanson would do better if she wasn't a terrible speaker. Well, I think if you've been paying attention in the last 2 weeks, you would see that Pauline Hanson is imploding. I think we've seen peak Pauline Hanson. Too many scandals, too many idiots in her party that are just idiots. That Ashby tape that came out this week. I personally would never vote for Pauline Hanson. I don't like her politics very much. She's a big government populist in a lot of ways. She talks about some issues that no one else does, like the unfairness of custody courts, but she'll never get my vote. I would give my vote to Cory Bernardi before her. And I'm not a conservative. I'm not a social conservative at all. I would vote for gay marriage tomorrow, but yeah, I'd go for Bernardi before Pauline Hanson. Yeah, well, that's what I think, Duke, and I think it's, as you say, and you're a statistician. I don't know if you were here when I was talking about the fact that when it comes to predictions about climate change, you're dealing with extremely complex system with a huge amount of variables, and you can't model that. They always talk about their models, and their models are always wrong. It's not like modeling, it's not like actuaries figuring out life expectancies for insurance policies that fit on nice normal distributions. It just doesn't work like that. So that's why climate change predictions, that's the part that I am a skeptic on, predictions, not because the predictions are going to be wrong necessarily. It's just that it's too complex to predict. There aren't many moderates. Well, that's the problem with a lot of issues. There aren't many moderates on climate change. There aren't many moderates on a lot of issues. That's the problem. The centre is fractured, and even if you say you're in the centre, you're a centrist. Centrist is now a pejorative because it implies that you're a fence sitter and that you don't have an opinion, and that's pretty dumb, really. It's not having an opinion. It's just not buying into the extreme rhetoric of either side. All right, well, we might wrap it up there. I would just ask, this will go up today probably, so I might get some feedback, see what people think. I think a lot of it, maybe it was a little dry because it's just me talking all the time, and I know some of the topics that people are interested in, some of them they're not. Some people don't give a shit about finance, some people do. I do, and I probably might even talk more finance on this channel in future. But just let me know what you think. Remember, this stream is open to people who donate $5 a month, and so you can ask questions and you can attend the stream, but anyone can listen to it. It'll go up on YouTube later. So I hope it's been of value. Any final words from the peanut gallery? Jared says there's a lack of middle right in Australia. Yeah, well, because Malcolm Turnbull is now middle left, and so is half the Liberal Party. G'day. Yeah. Well, actually, it's time to say see you later. So thanks for coming, guys. Hope this was useful. I will throw it up, and if you have any, as I said earlier, the question about libertarian stuff, if you have links to libertarian material that you'd like to put in there, it doesn't have to be Australian based. It can be anything. Feel free to post. All right. Thanks a lot for coming, and we will end it there. See you later.